Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Nicole's With You, featuring Talk That Matters. Today we have Mr. James Hogan. Mr. James Hogan is the Director of Bankable Frontier Associates. Mr. Hogan, please tell us about yourself.
Well, my name is James Hokins. I am the Director of Bankable Frontier Associates. It's an international development company. We are a smaller niche consulting company. We work in the area of financial inclusion. Financial inclusion has many different definitions, but it's essentially about bringing financial services of many kinds to low-income people. It's primarily international, in the international field.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Now, Mr. Hogan, what inspired your involvement in microfinance?
Well, like most people, I draw my inspiration from the people that I meet in my life, and that includes teachers, parents, etc. I was born in Worcester, Mass., grew up in northern New England, and I had a very profound experience in college, was to take advantage of a civic engagement program where I worked as a paralegal in a legal society in Prestonsburg, Kentucky. I wanted to get out of New England for a bit, and it was right in the middle of the gas crisis. And I don't know if you're familiar with eastern Kentucky, but it's a very poor place. It's in the Appalachians, and at that time in particular, with the gas crisis going on, it was a very isolated place. That was a really important turning point for me, and also it also helped me think about coming back to New England, where I then eventually worked for Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is now the independent senator from the state of Vermont, and I worked with him for 10 years, working with low-income young people in Burlington and establishing some important housing and economic development programs there, which gave me inspiration to look at other opportunities. And I eventually started working for the Ford Foundation in Nairobi, Kenya, and I ended up being in Africa, living in Africa, and raising my children in Africa for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And that's where I became particularly interested in microfinance.
Wow, that's excellent. Thank you so much. Mr. Hawkins, we invite you today to talk about what's happening in the international field, something called financial inclusion,
Yes.
Correct? But can you also
Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
No.
Yeah.
Financial inclusion is has a multiplicity of definitions. It's a very interesting sector. It includes people who work in mobile banking, branchless banking services, bringing different kinds of financial services to low-income people. It involves microcredit, the provision of small loans financed to low-income people through a number of different credit methodologies, primarily for business purposes, but also for housing purposes. My own expertise is in housing microfinance. It also incorporates, however, and very importantly, incorporates savings. Many people are looking for saving services more than credit.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know a lot of people are not sure what microfinance is. I know I do, but other folks might not.
Sure.
So could you explain to us what that is, microfinance?
Well, microfinance are a range of products and services for the lower end of the market, that low-income people are, in fact, a market. People often think that low-income people can't save, can't transact, are not credit-worthy, and there's many instances now all over the world that certainly shows that's not the case. What is very interesting now is people are getting away from just microcredit. When people think of microfinance, they often think of
Credit.
loans for particularly low-income women in groups, which could be anywhere in the world from India to the Philippines, Mexico, Colombia. These are all countries that I do a lot of work in. And going beyond now just loans to thinking about ways in which people save money under the mattress in their house. How do you attract and allow people to safely save their money in a bank or in a microfinance institution? And microfinance itself has become more and more sophisticated, has moved from being NGO, non-governmental organization kind of approach to much more mainstream, where banks are getting into it either in terms of providing wholesale finance to particular kinds of institutions that then on-lend the money in small amounts, or through wholesaling to a range of kinds of institutions for insurance purposes, microinsurance. So it's a large industry.
It is a large.
And my consulting company focuses on certain parts of that industry.
Excellent. I know what you said about where people save the money under the mattress. That's what I'm used to as a Haiti-born person.
Right.
You know, but way back then in Haiti, I know they didn't have banks.
Well, even before the earthquake in Haiti, for example, only about 10% of the people actually had a bank account.
Right.
And today, obviously, that's probably a lot less given the circumstances there. But the numbers of people who have cell phones has reached about 40 to 50% in Haiti. In other countries, there are people with maybe 20 to 25% of people have access to a bank branch, but may have as much as 75% of the people having a cell phone. So one of the issues that we work on is how can people use their cell phone to do their banking? Because many people live many miles from branches. It costs a lot of money
to get there,
to get back. It takes a lot of time away from people's daily lives, which also has a cost to people. And women in particular have multiple roles in low-income countries, and for them to take off time in order to walk or take a bus for 20 or 30 miles to do their banking is very difficult.
Yeah.
And when I say banking, banking takes many shapes, right? People, for example, in India, people may be living in a slum like Dharavi in Mumbai, and they have to send money to their families in some other part of this very large country. How do they do that? There are different.
Good question. How do they do that?
Well, there are different traditional ways to do that.
Yeah.
And there are also ways in which people now are remitting money using where they go to a retail outlet. It doesn't have to be a bank or a microfinance institution, but where they actually give their cash to somebody. They get then airtime on their cell phone, and they send the money to or the airtime to somebody who then can cash it in at another outlet on the other side.
Wow.
And this is very low cost, and it's very much focused on large scale, because those kind of transactions do cost money, and the way both the mobile network operators, cell phone companies, and the banks make money is through the amount of transactions that take place.
Right.
And particularly people also pay their bills as well as send money, and that's how.
Another way of Michael.
Right, and then there are many issues around that, and we can go into them, but I don't think there's a lot of technology issues around that, and those are the kinds of things we also work on at my company.
Wow. Speaking about your company, so what does your company do for financial, including overseas and and other work that you do?
Okay. Well, there are three areas that we focus on. One is the mobile banking piece, which I was just referring to. Another is, which is I think your listeners might find very interesting, is more and more governments are very concerned about corruption in their country around subsidies in particular. So people who have need for support systems and grants for taking care of their children, for taking care of elderly people, for getting their pensions and so forth. Governments are more and more going to a position where they will send money only through a bank account or through a bank. And that has created all kinds of opportunities to include poor people, very poor people in particular, into the finance system. We have a project with the Gates Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that focuses on helping these large commercial banks that are providing this service at the behest of their governments, how to do it profitably, how to do it well, how to get these social transfers into the right hands. Traditionally, subsidies by governments go to suppliers. For example, a fertilizer company in India might have gotten for many years a grant from the government to provide low-cost fertilizer to rural farmers. That has created a whole system of corruption at the supplier level, and the rural farmer still may not be able to get their fertilizer because of the perverse incentives involved in that system. As a result, people now are getting a cash through mobile banking, through these retail outlets, through the branch. And some of it's with biometric thumbprints, POS machines, but also with mobile. And so people now are getting their cash. They can then purchase their goods and services locally, which creates multiplier effects. And people in the United States, for example, governments, local governments in particular, are very much supportive of local economic development. It creates money that spins and multiplies in the community, creates jobs and opportunities there, as opposed to the money being in a supplier in some other part of the country. So this is a very interesting development, and we work a lot on that. So in addition to the mobile and in addition to what we call the G2P, government to person social transfer programs, we also work in the field of housing microfinance. This is a major interest of mine personally. Again, comes from my history and inspiration from Bernie Sanders, and also growing up in Worcester. How important housing really is to people, and access to finance is extremely important, particularly to build an asset like a house. But in low-income slums of Bombay or Nairobi or Johannesburg, where I do work, or in parts of Central America or Mexico City, people build their houses one loan at a time. They acquire and they save not only cash, but they also save secondhand building materials, sinks, roofing materials, and slowly over time, with their own resources and with microcredit and training, people can build their own houses, improve their own houses. And it's not just for consumption purposes, but they also build space onto houses for business. They build rental units that create income for the families. And as you know, not everybody wants to be a homeowner, and that's certainly the case in developing countries where people are coming from rural areas, trying to make money as much as possible and to send it back to their families in the rural areas, which happens a lot all over the world. So rental units are very important, and that's also part of housing microfinance. So those are the three areas that my company works in: the social transfers, housing microfinance, and what we call broadly branchless banking, but particularly mobile banking.
Mobile banking, which you explained earlier.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And your